Excellent.
Oh my God, I was missing so many people in the other page.
Okay,
Philip, Constantinos.
I'm gonna start now sharing my screen. Can you see my screen here, Mark? Can you confirm?
Yeah.
Yes.
There, David. Well done.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so welcome to this special edition. This is our first panel where we have Andrew Kakabadse with a special guest, non-VAB members, but also VAB members in this call. We're very proud to host this event about do you have what it takes to join a world-class board? So thank you, Andrew. In a few minutes, we're gonna make the formal introduction to you and the 4 panelists that are today in the VAB community. Before we jump there, I think that it's really interesting to share with you all what is VAB about. And just mentioning for those that doesn't know us very well, we can have and book a meeting with you. For the next week, Luis is our head of new members, so we will be able to book a few minutes with you. So VAB is a community with more than 210 members across 40 countries at the moment. So they are CEOs, entrepreneurs, boards, members with experience. Some of them, they want to increase their opportunities to find new opportunities in the boardrooms. So we are here to be connecting people. So we offer 3 main value propositions. It's all about connecting, learning, and networking, right? We have our members across the globe. We have maybe 35% in Europe, a lot of presence in North America, and we're starting to expand in the other regions across the globe. Even though that we are not from YPO, but we have a lot of members from this honor organization, right? Around maybe 50% of our members. And also we try to be very diverse. So we have at the moment 48 amazing women part of our community. So these represent around 23% of our members across the globe.
How many amazing men do you have?
That's just you, Ken. That's just you.
Exactly.
I can tell you, Mark, if that did it for me.
Saying about that, if you want to hear more, please just contact us. I am the CEO and the co-founder of the Virtual Advisory Board together with Mark, and we have the staff team here also to talk to you at any time. Thank you very much. And here quick about the last event that we had on last week, a really great event with Guillermo and with Philip, both in the call today. Thank you for being there with us and with our members. And just a quick message for our members that on next Friday, we will have Mike Stenson and Albert Atkins at 3 and 5 p.m. British time. And just a quick announcement as well that we are going to start from the 15th of October to have the meetings also in the Americas time zone. So normally we were using always the UK time zones, and right now we will be using the afternoons in Americas for people to join us as well. And thank you to Shefali for our last webinar with you about the unusual pathways to the boardroom. And our next one that will be on the 24th of September with South African, not VAB member, but a special guest, Michael Judin, a lawyer that is a specialist in the boards and the social media driven world. So we'll be very interested to have you and receive you here. Also, we just launched 2 days ago about NetEx. As you know, we have Shimi as one of the members of the VAB, together with Ken Tyler and Ian. Actually, Shimi and Ian will be part of this panel today, but we are gonna have a special series of Board Alliance program for VAB members, right? They will receive a special discount, right? We have sent all the information. Will be 3 weeks of full immersion on how really works a board, and you can really have this experience with a tree coach. So that will be a really good event. So if you wanted to hear more, please just let us know. And then about our partners, thank you. We are doing great collaboration with all of them, with NetEx, with STS Capital Partners in Canada, with Equilar, that is an official partner of NASDAQ, and CEO Coaching International, Shared C, and Shareparency. And if you want to hear more, no worries. Either you had a conversation with Fernanda, that's our community manager, or you will have a meeting with her during October as well. So thank you very much. And again, if you want to hear more, just let us know, add us on LinkedIn. And now I will pass it to you, please, Mark Hamill.
Thank you, David. Huge warm welcome to everybody on the call today. Delighted to see so many familiar faces and so many new ones. So huge welcome. Andrew has been a a hugely important part of VAB and our growth since we started 14 months ago. Andrew hosted an incredibly memorable event for us at Christmas time, and we're delighted to have him back today. Andrew's background is second to none in terms of board advisory, board knowledge, board insight, board governance. He literally bleeds board. So we're so happy to have Andrew today with such a distinguished panel. I'll hand very graciously over to Andrew and look forward very much to today's session. Andrew and the board and the panel, thank you very, very much.
Mark, thank you. Can I say also thank you to David, Mark, yourself, and our VAB colleagues for hosting this event. It's wonderful to have this event. May I first of all introduce the panel in the order in which they will make a comment. We have Shimi Shah, who is independent chair, non-executive director, and extensive experience with boards. We have Dr. Felipe More, who is lecturer in governance and reputation, program director of a major management course, but also researcher in some interesting tensions, paradoxes, and conflicts on boards. We have Katya Gorbatyuk, she's board director, background in finance, and especially wonderful research in stakeholder relations. And Katya has got research and experience across a number of countries in this particular topic. And then we have Ian White, board effectiveness reviewer, executive coach. He's mediator, he's consultant. I believe Ian's been involved in search. What I'm going to ask each of the panel members to do is speak for about 5 or 6 minutes. Then I'm going to ask each panel member a question. I don't know what the question will be. I'll wait for the panel member to finish, or a question will come to me while they're talking. But the purpose of the question is to stimulate interest and discussion with the audience. Can I start with you, Shimi, please, as the chair and probably someone who represents the most important role on a board?
Sure. And thank you, Andrew and David and Mark. I guess for me, I mean, if I look at my personal journey from non-exec director to chair, it's quite a different role to a degree. I mean, you're still a director on the board, but I really do think the chair role is something that is more, in my mind, not just sort of IQ driven, as I call it. It's a lot with EQ and SQ driven. You've got to have the gravitas, the communication skills, the ability to kind of read the room very, very well as the situation develops in a lot of cases. You've also got to have the connection with the management team. You're playing a very different role. So you're playing the kind of bridge between management and board, and you're also playing the the kind of navigator and the direction of that board, but you're also setting the scene in terms of the kind of personality of that board. How is it going to be driven? Is it a proactive board? Is it getting value? Where are you taking it? And I think for me, some of the challenging experiences on the board have been where issues have come up. So I've had to deal with a whistleblower issue, which basically threatened massively the entire reputation of one of the companies that I sit on. The second is the tension between different stakeholders. So I sit on a board where it's a joint venture between a private equity firm and a family, multi-generational family stakeholder, and the kind of end motivations of both are very different. So you've really got to juggle both sides, but at the same time, be objective as well as non-biased. So in a way, you've got to control that room in a variety of ways that most non-exec directors don't really need to do as such. The other thing for me that's also quite important is the prep work that goes into chairing meetings. It's really important that you interact and liaise with the CEO and the core management team, that you're aware of what's going on, some of the tensions or the politics that might be behind the scenes, and be aware of that, and at the same time sort of liaise with the other board members. So one of the things I do is try and have a regular, if it's a monthly or a quarterly meeting with each of the directors, but I also kind of tap into the management team, not just the CEO once a quarter or once, every half year. I'd sort of certainly tap into the rest of the management team as well, just to sort of make sure I've got the pulse of what's going on. And I think the other thing that's really important is that the chair is also, in a lot of cases, the sort of external face of the company and the board to a degree. And it's really important to remember that sort of balance between the two, the internal and the external. So I think those would kind of be the salient points for me. The other one point that I'd probably mention is the transition from a non-executive to a chair, and how you kind of as an individual progress if you want to become a chair, and what's the best way of doing it, and is really to start building your gravitas, start becoming that high impact non-exec that is starting to kind of raise above the parapet. You're starting to show the the kind of characteristics that really translate into what makes a good chair, not just a good non-exec.
Sherry, thank you. Very insightful. If we go back to the question of world-class, I know it's a description. It's very difficult to define what world-class is, but if you take it as a sentiment, which of the elements, characteristics, qualities, capabilities that you have identified really distinguish the chair as world-class? Is there something that needs to be outstanding for you to be described as world-class as a chair?
I personally think the world-class skills for a chair are the softer skills. Communication, gravitas, the ability to read a room. I think those are the things that really make you stand above the rest. Ethics, integrity are kind of all a base foundation, but when you start building on that and start acting with the credibility, and obviously you've got to have the sort of executive knowledge and the experience that's required from an industry and a business perspective. But I would say that's almost a given. What really defines you at that kind of world-class level, and if you look at the chairs that are at that level, it really is about the softer skills.
And if you don't mind, just very quickly following on, from your experience, how many of the chairs that you've met really exhibit that? Is it a minority? Is it many people are developing that? What's your view?
I think it's still a work in progress, is the honest truth. I don't see, I think the challenge is a lot of chairs see themselves as another non-exec director in a lot of cases. And I think act in the same way. And I think they don't level up to what's required in a lot of cases.
Shimi, thank you very much. That's really set a wonderful tone for the rest of the panel. Felipe, you have extensive experience as a director, functional HR, as well as other things, but you've also conducted some very interesting research on how tensions and difficulties on boards play out. Can you give us your comments of what it takes to be a world-class board director and a world-class board?
Thank you, Andrew, and good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. My voice is slightly lower because I got a cold, courtesy of my youngest son. I'd like to thank VAB also for the invitation, Andrew, and everybody else for setting up today's meeting. I spent quite a few years trying to go after paradox and tensions on boards. And as you can imagine, I found many tensions, not so many paradoxes. I won't go into that detail. It's quite boring, in fact. It's sometimes not very helpful because a paradox you can never dissolve. It's really how you look at things. It's in your mind. Sometimes you feel stuck. You don't know which direction to take or what to do. And that may be a paradox. So the tension is different. The tension is something that can be positive if handled correctly. So in my research, I had the opportunity to talk to various CEOs and chairmen of very large firms not least GlaxoSmithKline, BP, BAE Systems, and so on. Skype Technology, also some more entrepreneurial firms, and so on, and to try and understand how the chairs and CEOs, and in effect how the boards respond to tensions that emerge from what we call, discontinuous change or complex problems. Things like a reputational crisis, things like a restructuring that has to take place because the market has just collapsed. Think about the industry of the building industry after the 2008 financial crisis, or during that, where housing prices went down 40% overnight and volume went down another 40% overnight, and they had to try and understand what to do with very little information. So tensions, they come in the bad times. The bad news about this is that bad times are more and more frequent. So tensions will be more and more frequent. And I found many different tensions, not least, as Simi was mentioning, between shareholders that have different appetites and different needs. But the key tension that we often it's very well known is the tension of control and collaboration. So the board, the chairman, needs to understand in each moment whether the board should be closer to the management team, supporting, collaborating, or on the other hand, should be more detached, should be more on a monitoring type of function. What I found during this crisis, during these various crises, was that when those tensions are about reputation, are about more social political problems, more systemic problems, that the board is really that the chairman takes the lead typically, and really is that external the one that drives the board, and the board coalesces into a team. When things are more executional, we're talking about the transformation, a restructuring, this is really led by the CEO, and the tensions are a lot more to do with actually more tried and tested processes of what to do. Shall we do this or that? So in many ways, when the tensions are people issues, it's for the chairman. When the tensions are about choices about what to do, it's more for the CEO. I don't know what else to tell. I mean, there's many tensions, and they are so contextual. Every board will face different tensions depending on their very specific circumstances. I shall say that with the emergence of sustainability, ESG, stakeholderism, directors, boards bloody well be developing this capability to face into tensions and to face into aspects of the business and of the board that can seem as insurmountable or contradictory, because they will more and more come to the fore. It's a lot more difficult to be a director in a stakeholder environment, multi-stakeholder, than it is to have a very clear line of fiduciary duty to shareholders, and that's it. So what does distinguish a world-class director, world-class board? The ability to not hide from these tensions, but to raise these tensions, to identify them early, and to face into them. What do you need for that? You need contextual intelligence. You need systemic thinking.
Felipe, thank you. Thank you for capturing your research, which is interesting and has attracted a lot of attention. Just one question from all this, and I do accept the contextual point. It really does vary from board to board. And I suspect, Felipe, it varies from board to board, whether you're profit or non-profit.
Yeah.
Is there one tension, one problem area that really leaves boards vulnerable, irrespective of context? Did you have that one thing where the board or the chairman can't quite cope?
It's people. It's it's removing people, either be the CEO or directors that are toxic and are on the board. Really difficult. If you ask chairman, what is the thing that you're least effective in doing? I said, I know that I have people that are toxic, or they're not the right fit for the board dynamics. They're making everything a mess. I can't do much about it. I face tremendous difficulty, either because they represent a shareholder, or because it's just not, they find it awkward, they cannot deal with it. So that's one. The other one is CEO performance is often tackled too late. And it takes too much time to tackle CEO performance when it's poor or misfit. So again, it's not how to conduct a restructuring. It's not how to, these are tried and tested processes. This is for the CEO to do, but it's the people around the table, and whose people should be in the buzz and what people shouldn't. That is for the chairman to assess and to make sure that the right people are around and working well. And those are the difficult ones. And I think that echoes Chimi's point about, being soft skills, being about conducting the orchestra, and the orchestra are people. So I'd say CEO performance also. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Felipe. Wonderful insights, which leads us very well into Katja. Katja, you've got extensive experience, not only in stakeholder relationships, but in different sectors. Could you outline from the stakeholder interaction, stakeholder relationship perspective, what is the nature of a board that has the aspiration to be world-class?
Thanks for that intro, Andrew. Well, firstly, I would like to draw a distinction between stakeholder engagement and stakeholder governance, because one doesn't equal the other. And if I may draw a parallel here, it's like going to a doctor and getting a diagnosis, and the difference was actually implementing that diagnosis and making changes in your life. And the second important distinction I would like to make is between philanthropy and CSR, corporate social responsibility, and purpose-driven strategy that is accountable for by the board, that informs all financial, strategic, and capital allocation decisions. So I've been in the financial services industry since 1997, and I can tell you that it's quite a different place today from what it used to be. And right now, being at the London Stock Exchange, I see more and more evidence in my role as to how the way the company plays a role in the society and the world, how it impacts its ability to raise capital, its share price dynamics, its ability to raise follow-on financing. And just this week, we have published extensive ESG data from one of our group companies, Refinitiv, which includes data on environmental, social, and governance factors on about 22,000 companies around the world. And that is due to include private companies as well. And that is linked to concrete, publicly available information. So the bottom line is there is nowhere to hide. Good governance is something that has always been expected by investors, but what is meant by good governance has changed. If we go back to the basics here, the Companies Act, Section 172 in the UK, it does say that directors' prime duty is to promote the success of the company for the benefit of shareholders, but in doing so, it must have regard to the consequences of the decisions in the long run and to the needs of stakeholders. But what is meant by the word considering is quite different today from what it used to be. And today, it's more than just lip service. Everyone is increasingly savvy and discerning about greenwashing and also about tick the box diversity. So I wouldn't even try those things. On the regulator side, the UK regulator, the FRC, is very keen to embed stakeholders in the corporate governance code and is actually focusing on changing behaviors and the board culture itself. So that's a very welcome development from the FRC, especially as directors worry about their fiduciary duties. So all that pressure from regulators, institutional investors, employees, and society is mounting, and that's magnified by the vast information available at lightning speed on social media. And as a result, many boards today have accepted the needs to consider stakeholders, and all the right statements are being made, and many of them are backed by intentions. But the challenge that boards are facing today is in practical implementation. So as Andrew mentioned, as part of my work for the IOD Center for Corporate Governance, we looked into some of the best practices in implementing stakeholder governance from the perspective of expert practitioners who have been exposed, who have had experience with a number of boards in various industries and countries. So as a result of those interviews, some key trends have emerged. And I would like to highlight some of these, what I would call ingredients for effective stakeholder governance. The stepping stone, I would say, is the way boards are informed on stakeholders. And that is absolutely essential because that is what is fed into board discussions. And without information collected from various silos that exist in the organization, or for example, on employees from the HR department, from the department dealing with social media, from supplier relations department, there will not be necessarily a connection between the output of stakeholder engagement and what's going on in the boardroom. And that is particularly useful for countries that operate in various jurisdictions. So that that information needs to be presented to the board in a very clear and concise manner by somebody who is put in the position to synthesize it effectively for the consideration of the board. And that information needs to include who the key stakeholders are, what is the relationship with them, what have been the engagement outputs, and what messages are going into the boardroom that are due to inform decisions and discussions. And this is the stepping stone of the board being an effective decision maker. But these board reports will not evolve without the expertise on ESG factors being present in the boardroom, because boards will not know what questions to ask. So developing this ESG expertise is essential, starting from the chair, and that should be a top priority when boards think about succession, when they displace inactive board members, and also the key here is to develop an understanding how stakeholder engagement needs to inform decision making, and therefore help cross this divide between engagement and governance. Another important consideration is, of course, board agenda, because it's a very busy item filled with transactional kind of parts to it, and constructing the board agenda that at the outside is considerate of stakeholders is critical. Importantly, it shouldn't be necessarily a separate stakeholder item. It is most effective when stakeholders are part of every discussion and every decision. And that brings me into another important tool, non-financial reporting, which in itself is a great tool for boards to check whether they're going into the right direction. And of course, that starts with a purpose statement, which is signed by the board, and that talks about the organization's role in the society and the world and identifies key stakeholders. And that non-financial disclosure should then report on the feedback from stakeholders, how it went into the boardroom and how it served as a basis for decisions, and how these decisions in the boardroom then get translated into the inputs for management. And then this non-financial reporting becomes a very effective storyteller, especially if it's voluntary, and especially if it's part of an integrated report that is written in plain language that every person can understand, and is of the same rigor and quality as the annual report that we're used to seeing. And then finally, it would be a remiss for me not to mention accountability on stakeholder-related deliverables. In fact, most successful companies in this area link their remuneration packages, at least in part, with non-financial objectives. And this is how I would say stakeholder engagement evolves into stakeholder governance. And I should underscore that this is not a static milestone, but it's a continuous process. And I would also say that it's an art rather than a science.
Katja, thank you. Most comprehensive. Very much like your distinctions, stakeholder governance, engagement, stakeholder relations. The idea of evidence coming through and all the board being involved and stakeholders being involved as well. But if we go back even to the 1980s, the collapse of Barings Bank, if we go back to some of the recent scandals, what was so interesting there was the board knew what was happening and did nothing. So my question to you is, who really is responsible for implementation? Despite the quality of evidence, you can hide behind evidence. Who is responsible for implementation on stakeholder considerations?
Well, it's a very good question, and it starts with a purpose statement that is signed by the board collectively. And then, of course, those who are shaping the board papers for delivery into the boardroom, and the board chair, of course, as Shimi mentioned, is key in leading those discussions. That the work of the boardroom should be underpinned by more detailed and granular work of the board committees and their chairs, and that those discussions should be fed into the main boardroom discussion. And again, those shaping the company's disclosure, and of course the CEO, but I would say it's a matter for every person in the organization. And I would also say that being a board member in today's circumstances is not an honorable position. It's not the crown of your career, but it's rather very intense work that one should be prepared to undertake when signing up to that important, critical role.
Katja, thank you very much. You really have given a lot of food for thought. Ian, you've heard the arguments from the other three panel members. You, in a sense, are servicing boards as reviewer. I believe you were at one point search, but definitely coach, mediator. Can you tell us your experience of boards, and again, around the theme of what does it take to be world-class?
Yes, I can, Andrew. Thank you, and very nice to meet everyone here today. Some of you I know, some of you I don't. I should actually point out I don't do any search work, and never have done.
All right, apologies for that.
No, that's all right, but it's important in the work that I do, because I do need to be independent. So I think the first thing I would say when I look at boards is, and I often talk to Neds about what are the real qualities that they need to have, and there are two that really spring to my mind as absolutely essential, and they're probably the only two in a sense that you need to have, and that's courage and integrity. And if I look at the boards I've reviewed over the last few years, I don't think I've ever come across a board that doesn't have integrity. Maybe I've just been very lucky, but I find courage is a much more wanting aspect. And some of the problems that I see in boards is because people don't have courage. One of the previous codes in the UK a few years ago said that being on a board is not necessarily a comfortable place, and nor should it be. And so if I had to give any advice to people on this call today about how to be an effective director, I think it is being clear that at times you've got to have that courage and you've got to stand up, and you might well be in a minority of one. And having been in that position, that's not necessarily a comfortable place, but it's a really important aspect to remember, because I think one of the key things that comes up in the boards that I look at is a lack of challenge. A lot of challenge that you see in the boardroom isn't very constructive. It can be nitpicking. Accountants, and sorry to offend any of the accountants on this call, are quite good at this, because they will naturally go within the confines of their area of specialism. So again, a second thing I would say, related very much to courage, and if you're going to come onto the board as a non-executive director, is to make sure that you see that wider view and that you don't just revert to your area of specialism. I think it's really important that you do that, and you'll be much more value there if you do that, because one, you won't be stepping over the executive's toes in terms of getting involved in the operational detail, and two, you really will be there to actually help the executives perform. I think it also comes back to what Shimi started saying about the chair, and actually your question, Andrew, you know, how often do you see a world-class chair? And I would say it's quite rare. It's quite rare to see a really effective chair. I've done some work for quite a well-known chair in the UK, and he chairs everything from FTSE 100s to much smaller organisations. And what I like about his style is that he can both do the detail and see the big picture. So he knows when to get involved in the detail, when to really work with the executives on that, but actually to back off when he doesn't need to do that. It was the late David Nadler, who many of you may know as a corporate governance expert, who said, you have to build boards. And I think that's one of the really key things for the chair to do. I think too few chairs actually understand that. And so when you go in, you may have a crisis board, you may have to completely change the membership of that at the boardroom table. And that again takes a lot of courage, but it takes a lot of skill as well to really mold the board, not to how you are, but to be the best for the organization. And again, I see too few chairs who do that. I think one of the things I find quite disheartening with some of the chairs I've seen is they tend to dominate the proceedings. I think it was Peter Drucker who said the effective manager should listen first and speak last. And actually that's a good mantra for a chair. You are there to frame an issue and then facilitate the discussion. And if the discussion has covered every point, you don't even need to give your view at the end. You can sum up. So I think actually having that real facilitation skill is absolutely key to being a world-class board and having a world-class board. I think there are a number of other aspects I see in the work that I do. There is still too much lack of understanding by the non-executive directors of the business. I think it's a very encouraging thing that we get people in financial services companies in NEDs who've never served in that sector, because they bring an objectivity and a different stance, which is important. But you can get away with not understanding the business and the sector for a year or two, but you can't do that after 5 or 6 years. So I think it really is making sure that you've really understood and you really make the commitment. Another thing to bear in mind if you take on a non-executive role, or you take on more than one non-executive role, is that if it's billed as being 30 days a year, that's fine when everything's going well. But if your board's in crisis, or if you in any type of M&A activity, you can double or triple that. So when you're looking at the time commitment, and this is something that comes up often in boards, that people aren't making sufficient time commitment to their particular organization, remember that, and it particularly in the early stages of being a non-executive on a board, is going to take you a lot longer than that 30 days. So I think that's a real focus. I think the other thing, and again, all these matters really, and this really comes up in board effectiveness reviews, all these things come back to having good relationships. So it is really understanding what the role of the board is and what the role of the executive team is. And that's where I think non-executives often and executives often have challenges. I frequently hear non-executives say, we've got lots of experience in this particular area. There's been a crisis. I've got loads of experience, but why didn't the CFO ring me up? Equally, the executives will say, the non-executives are great at saying, there's a comma missing on the minutes, but they can't actually really focus on the key issues. Now, one of the ways around that, and this is what I think a world-class board should be doing, led by a world-class chair, is really to sit down once or twice a year and say, how do we get the best from each other? How do we work effectively together? And that's not a matters reserved. And matters reserved outlining the mandate of the board is very important. But actually, how do you work together? And that's a recommendation I've often made to boards. And it sounds to me very obvious, and it is very obvious. And I'm sure many of the recommendations I make are very obvious, but they're often things that boards forget. So again, I think it's about having that really good relationship between the parties. And I think, again, we talk about having the right skills on the board, and skills are very important, but dynamics are much more so. And so when I talk with Neds, I said you can have 8 or 10 people sitting around the boardroom table who have all the skills that you need to cover for your organization. But if you've got those 8 or 10 people and they can't stand working with each other, then you're going to have a dysfunctional board. So again, that comes very much back to the chair. And it is such a pivotal role, and one that I think is very underrated, really by boards. To get a good chair is absolutely key. And having sat on a board where we've had a couple of chairs who have not been very good, it doesn't make for a very happy place. I suppose the final thing I'd say is we're making it more and more complex to be a director, and I'm not sure that that's a good thing. I mean, I do a lot of work in financial services with regulated entities in the UK. We have 2 regulators there. There's a lot of regulation. We have, the Companies Act in the UK, again, mentioned, I know that won't be relevant for a lot of you, the biggest piece of legislation that's ever been enacted. And, if boards are going to be successful, of course, we've got to have laws and regulations, but it is about people. It is about dynamics. It is about relationships. And that's what's, and we've had all this regulation, we've had all this guidance, and we still go wrong. In the UK yesterday, another big corporate crisis has occurred. Chief executive's gone. The lawyers, both external and the internal lawyers, were seen to be wanting. And there's been a huge investigation by QC on that. So I think we really need to focus on those relationships to be an effective board, a world-class board, to lead a world-class organisation.
Ian, thank you. Very, very interesting. I take your point about the chair creating the culture, Shimi's point, the chair very much almost creating the culture and climate for the idea of courage, but courage is a central thing. But can we just bottom out courage a little bit? Ken asks, what about integrity and courage? Or sometimes the lack of integrity. Also, there was a question on authenticity. And Cecile asks, from the French perspective, where we have representatives on the board, it must take a lot of courage to make a point that the worker representative need to make when the other board members feel it should not be on the agenda. So could you talk to us a little bit about what it takes to display that courage and act upon that courage? And is it consistent, for example?
Well, I think if I go back to my days of being a general counsel, I remember working with lawyers who could be quite aggressive and defensive when they had to make difficult points. And I think, again, there are ways to approach difficult issues. I mean, one of the things I talk a lot with non-executives about is if you're going to raise a difficult issue at the board, if you're going to, there's something you really disagree with, don't try and catch the executives out. Don't raise that at the board meeting for the first time and try and catch them out in front of the chair and the CEO. Talk to them beforehand. So for me, courage is really about having those good relationships, for being able to raise those issues. But equally, it is about thinking, actually, if I don't get the answer I want, then maybe I have to depart from the board, and maybe I have to I have to leave, and having the conviction to do that. And it's one of the reasons we say in the UK, you should never do non-executive roles for the money. And many non-executives would argue you wouldn't do that for the money anyway, because they don't pay sufficiently well to do that. But it does mean you've got to be prepared to walk away if necessary. So for me again, courage is much easier if you've built those relationships. It's still not easy, and as I say, having experienced being in a minority of one before, I accept that it's not easy. But it's something you've got to do. Don't go on a board if you're not prepared to do that.
Ian, I'm just going to follow up with a question, because a number of people have asked, including Ken, if the courage is not there, is that now the foundation for lack of integrity, lack of authenticity, and now it's the basis of becoming a dysfunctional board? Is courage so much of a central theme?
Yes, I think it is, and I think it does lead to a lack of integrity. If we can't be honest and transparent with each other at board level, then what does that say for the rest of the organisation? I think Bob Garrett, when he wrote his book, the fish rots from the head, was absolutely right. If the board isn't, transparent and honest, then the rest of the organisation won't be. So absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the panel members. Perhaps some of the questions in the chat room, and I throw them open. Felipe, you may wish to start with this one. Is tension, conflict necessarily bad? Is there something known as positive tension, constructive tension? Felipe.
Yes, of course. I think, yeah, you will remember this, Andrew. We did a piece on that. Yes, tension is positive and conflict is negative. Tension is the confrontation of different views that, of course, people feel uncomfortable about, because nobody likes to be proven wrong, or to change their perspective, or this is cognitively hard, this is psychologically hard to have to admit that maybe we should go somewhere else. Sometimes this is not so well, and but it's necessary. It's necessary. Tension is a board that is no tension is not doing much, for sure, because just of the nature of why a board exists is to address the difficult issues. So a board without tension, a board the conflict, yes, the conflict is more difficult, and then that's people, right?
And that's people.
It's typically personality, styles, personal agendas, ambitions, that bring the real conflict is about that. I think I agree with the point. I mean, obviously, the chairman really needs to set the tone, and there's no reason why. It's a lot easier to be courageous if you have an environment that welcomes. You won't call it courage, then you just call it normal behavior. You probably won't call it courage. You call it, the way we do things here. We speak openly. So yeah, that would be my comment, very briefly.
Thank you very much. Shimi, one question: diversity, robust dialogue. Is there a fine dividing line between that and what Felipe was just talking about, unhealthy conflict and nastiness? And if so, what has been your approach to ensuring that we have robust dialogue, but it doesn't spill over into negativity?
Sure, and it's a very fine line in certain cases between, robust and healthy dialogue, and I guess stakeholder agendas that may be different on boards. And I think this is where it's really important for a chair to be, very independent and non-biased and objective, and that's where the gravitas and that sort of soft skills that I was talking about comes in. But I think also Ian's points on courage are very reflective, that as a chair, you've got to be all inclusive. You've got to hear all sides of the argument, but you've also got to have the integrity and the courage to shut down unhealthy dialogue and be able to say, look, this isn't the right atmosphere. We've been in situations where we've literally had two investors on a board literally coming to almost a fist fight because they had such differing objectives for that board, in a case of dismissal of a CEO in this matter. And it's really important in situations like that the chair really does step up and act in the right manner. And in terms of diversity, one of the things, there's a lot of talk about diversity on boards and non-execs and more gender and ethnic diversity. I still don't see it at chair level in the same capacity as you might see the progression on on the non-exec side. And I wonder a little bit, maybe I'm being a little bit scandalous here, but I wonder if there's still a gender issue of women not being seen as strong enough in certain cases to be chair. And I've heard that comment a few times in the last couple of years. which frankly I don't think is appropriate. But I think it's psychologically a issue.
Jimmy, I'm just going to take that point about gender and strength. There's an interesting chair of a major bank in the city, and he said one of his major contributions is to create comfort on the board, the opposite to what you might call the strong person, the dominant character. And that comfort, is that equally a gender issue or not? Is comfort an important issue in the first place?
I think comfort is an issue, but I would rephrase that word of strength and power to more of gravitas and integrity. And I think that's what a chair requires. It's not about being a dominant, strong individual. It's about having that open communication, and I think that's what that kind of comfort level comes from. But that also comes from the self-confidence of gravitas.
Okay, and that is what you feel is one of the criticisms made towards females who go on are not appointed as chairs.
Yeah, I mean, I still see a massive discrepancy in terms of the numbers of women appointed as chair versus non-execs. It's a big gap between the two.
Thank you. Katja, one of the questions raised is for an NED, and especially on stakeholder relations. The NEDs are really reliant on data from the management. What is your experience concerning trusting that data? Because, as you know, it doesn't take much to position information in such a way that the board believes it. It doesn't take that much to knock a board off course if you're a subtle management. So what has been your experience on quality of data regarding stakeholder relations and how NED should trust it?
Well, it's a great question, and I think there is a very good chance, unfortunately, that if this work is done in silos, that it will be of varying quality and varying reliability, and therefore it requires somebody very senior, a very senior appointment that's been advocated for a long time by the person who I consider to be the king of corporate governance, Mervyn King, who has for years advocated for a senior role that's called stakeholder relations officer. And that would be a C-suite executive, a very experienced business person who will have the wisdom of accumulating that information, picking out what's important and delivering it into a dynamic report for the board consideration on an ongoing basis. So that requires considerable experience and considerable commitment to stakeholder issues. And it's not widely practiced yet, but I think that considering the role that stakeholders have to play in the success of the company, and this relationship is kind of interconnected, the way the corporation, the role the corporation plays in the world, and the role that stakeholders play in the life of the corporation, considering that evolving relationship, it does warrant a senior person responsible for that work.
Katja, in the past, there were similar roles created in the area of CSR, corporate social responsibility, and they didn't seem to have worked out. So if I press you, is it the role, or is it the quality of the questions and the persistent nature of continually asking those questions that gets NEDs to trust data?
Well, CSR is a completely different activity.
It is.
Yeah, it's a silo activity. It's a nice to have activity, and it has nothing to do with the strategy of the company, with its purpose. It's a very fantastic thing that any company has, and it obviously adds to its public image, but it doesn't change in the way the company functions, the way decisions are arrived at, and it doesn't consider the degree, the extent of the company's externalities, the degree of its impact on the world, the environment, and the local communities. So there is a big difference. And when something is in a silo, is de-emphasized in decisions.
Yeah.
It's kind of completely different people are put in a line of responsibility there, and the impact, the effect is completely different.
Yeah, point taken, very good point. Ian, with your perspective as going into boards, Ken asked the question, what does it take to rejuvenate the board? Partly because of stakeholder motivation, which may be low, but partly of other things. But do you have insights into a board that's declining in some sort of way and needs rejuvenation? What should we do?
Well, I think that, again, it's some brave decisions. I mean, I think that takes a first-rate chair, and I've seen that happen where new chairs come in and had to really start from scratch and, you know, make some very difficult decisions about changing the board members. And in fact, this particular organisation was in the financial services sector, so that is quite difficult because in the UK we've got a dual regulated sector for a lot of organisations, and not only have you got to get the you know, you've got to really get the right people, but you've got to get the regulator to think you've got the right people, and those two things don't always match up. So I think again that takes you know, a really effective chair to actually do that and you know, really think ahead. And again, you know, I think you've written a lot on this, Andrew. You know, strategy is difficult. Strategy for boards is difficult and it's challenging. And your boards aren't always good at that, but you need somebody who thinks, you know, what do we need for tomorrow in a very uncertain world.
Very good point. As we're coming to the end of our time together, one question raised, but it's in my mind. We've had so many different perspectives, very rich. But if I asked each of you as a panel member, which are the two most critical components, qualities, skills required for a world-class board? And if I can start with Shimi, what would they be? And the reason I asked the question is I suspect in people's minds, we've had such richness today, perhaps giving them some focus may help. So Shimi, which are the two for you, if you can answer that?
Or you just broke up at the beginning there. Could you just say the first sentence again?
Of course. One question that was asked, but it's also been in my mind, was that we've had a wonderful discussion, a lot of richness, but many people may be walking away from here saying, well, what are the qualities? What are the skills? What are the one or two things that really make a world-class board? Because we've had such a diversity of perspective. So if we go through each of the panel members and starting with you, what would be, let's say, the two things, and I leave it very broad, things, skills, qualities, or whatever, that you think make up a world-class board?
And for me, it's EQ and communication.
It is. So really, you're emphasizing that people and sensitivity to people and dynamics issue.
Yep.
Thank you. Felipe, what for you?
Well, I really think these days you really need to be able to I think the EQ is part of it, but it's about being resilient, being able to face into difficult circumstances and bounce back as a board. Face into a more tough discussions and bounce back. So it's this bouncing back, is this ability to fight, to face into difficult circumstances and remain together, remain focused and remain with a sense of direction.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Resilience. Katja, for you, and can I add one more component, which is there are a lot more pressures being put on boards. The time to deal with things is diminishing. There are more, let's say, unexpected occurrences occurring. So what from you, particularly from a stakeholder perspective, would be the two qualities that make up a world-class board?
Andrew, for me, it's kind of unequivocal. It's passion and good values. So previously, we used to be one person at work and another person with our families and at home, and that separation is eroding, and thank God for that. So I think the more we bring our good values into the boardroom, the more sincere the discussion will be, and the more impact as a kind of cohesive organism the board will be able to achieve. And the truly effective boards that I've seen were led by passionate leaders and had passionate board directors who truly care about what the corporation does, what they or a charity, what they do, and the impact on the environment, on stakeholders. I think that's essential.
Thank you so much. And Ian, you looking in, what is it that boards should have, don't have, but must have?
Other than courage and integrity, which I mentioned, I think there are two things, Andrew. I think good relationships around the boardroom table. And one of the things I see a lot of, or Ned say a lot, is we don't know each other well enough. So I think people need to really, get to know each other. And if you take a Ned role, one of my big pieces of advice is go and get to know the employees, go walk around and really get to know them, because then you'll get to know the organization much better. A few Neds do that. And the second one I've mentioned already is be a good listener, because you'll take a lot more in and you'll be much more effective.
Thank you. Can I thank our panel members, Shimi Sharp, Philip Moray, Katja Gorbaczuk, and Ian White. I thank you for your insightful comments, for being open, giving your views, and leaving the audience with such rich insights and information. May I also thank David, Mark, and the VAB team for hosting this event, creating this event, and having this event. I hope everybody has benefited, and I wish you a wonderful evening or a wonderful morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thanks, panel. That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All the best.
Weekend, everybody. Thank you. Thanks again.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Thanks.
Bye.